Hello and welcome to the Horror Bois End of Year Retrospective, which is still a podcast on the internet. And I'm still Austin, and I'm still joined as always by
Bill Chris.
But we're not going to be talking about a horror movie, because this episode is not a horror movie review podcast. This is an end of year review podcast, if you will. So we're going to talk about the whole year. The first ever year of Horror Bois. Ooh.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with our first question, which Chris is going to have to say some of the stuff again, because we did do a different, it's pretty much the same video, but with different questions for a different channel. So Chris, tell me about your Christmas again. I want to hear it.
Oh, okay. I had a pretty chill Christmas. Just stayed at home. Opened gifts with my sisters. And we played Switch Sports for like a few hours. And just ate food. My arm still really hurts from playing Switch Sports because I was flinging my arm around like a crazy person. Because, you know, the more vigorous you are with your swings, the better you play.
I don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure it's like all in the wrist movement, but
What I've heard somewhere. And then I got my stitches out today, which I will consider an extra Christmas present, so that's pretty cool.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, my Christmas was cool, and it was super chill. It was just me and my immediate family. It was nice. We just opened presents, which I will talk about a few of right now because they're very horror centric.
Oh.
Some of my big present that I was super happy about for the horror fans who may find this video was the Scream Factory Blu-ray box set of the Friday the 13th collection. It's all 12 movies, and the art on the box is amazing and all that. I love it. I'm so happy about that. Also got X, Texas Chainsaw Massacre on a steelbook. Got Scream. Got the Wishmaster collection on Blu-ray. Got Santa's Sleigh on DVD because it's not available on Blu-ray.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was thinking of the new Violent Night movie.
No. I got Sleepaway Camp on Blu-ray. I think that's all the Blu-rays I got. I'm probably missing one, and it was definitely horror. Because the only thing I didn't get that was horror was I got Into the Spider-Verse on Blu-ray.
Oh.
Yeah. And one thing, you will, if you're watching this on the video, you can see it in the corner of my screen, but it's kind of small, so I'm going to pop it up here real quick so you can see it a little bit more clearly. It's this really cool, like, 3D art, paper art by an artist named, I want to say it's Aza Gonzalez. I hope I'm saying the right artist's name. It's awesome. It's made with, like, paper. It's this cool 3D thing. It's cool. I'll try to remember to, like, tag their socials in the YouTube video description so you could go buy some of your own art from them. They do a lot of cool horror art in this 3D paper style. Ooh. I got this cool Leatherface one. If you're an audio listener, I got this cool Leatherface paper art thing. It's in a frame. It's cool.
There's Bubba.
Yeah. Or 15 other names.
Yeah.
Or Junior, or Leather, or Leatherface, and like probably at least 2 more that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tommy Hewitt in the remakes. But this is from the original, which means his name is just Leatherface, actually. Oh. Or your brother. I guess he's also referred to as your brother when, you know, the cook says, "Look what your brother did to the door."
Yeah.
But yeah, it's time to move on to kind of thoughts on this year, because this has been a really great year for horror. So let's talk about our favorite horror movies of 2022. Horror movies that came out this year. There's a lot. I'll start, so Chris has a little bit of time to think. I have 3, because I actually only saw 3 of the new horror movies that came out this year. There's like 10 or 15 or so that I really wanted to see, but I just didn't get around to them. So the 3 that I saw this year that all are like top tier for me and awesome are Scream 2022, Scream 5, whatever you want to call it. It's great new entry into that series. We've already talked about it on the podcast. If you want to know my thoughts on that, go watch that episode. But movies I haven't had a chance to talk about at all on the podcast, X, the first of what's going to be Ty West's trilogy in this world. This very much an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre almost, with the way it feels in a lot of ways. But yeah, X is the first in it. I still haven't seen Pearl. Really want to. Looking forward to Max seeing next year. But yeah, X is great. It wasn't quite what I expected going in, but it was still really awesome. I loved how creepy it made me feel. I felt gross watching it in a great way. I was unsettled the whole time, which is probably the only movie that I felt that way with, really, that I watched this year. And I've watched 70, 80 horror movies this year.
Yeah.
And lastly, the one I want to watch most recently is The Menu. Oh, the movie is such a joy. It's such a fun little horror comedy. Amazing cast. Anna Taylor-Joy and Ralph Fiennes and Nick Holt all delivered amazingly in their specific roles. The rest of the cast is also great, but those are the three people who stood out the most. They're also the two main stars and Nick Holt. But yeah, it's great. I don't really want to even say too much because I feel like the trailers, if anything, made people think it was going to be one thing that it ended up not being, which I guess that might even be more than I should have said, but just go watch it. If you like horror, I don't think you would not enjoy it. I mean, you might. Who knows? Some people don't. That's how movies work. But I don't understand how you wouldn't if you like horror, especially horror that has a very comedic edge to it. But yeah, those were the horror movies of 2022 that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I would have to say that I really enjoyed Scream 5, as well as X, and although I don't know if I would qualify The Menu as much of a horror as it is a thriller, but that is definitely valid, and I do love that movie.
Well, we're covering Horror Boys next year, so I don't know what you're talking about. It's the horror movie, and it has horror as its number 2 on IMDb, and I stand by it. And also, I think the distinction between horror and thriller is stupid half the time. That's a whole different discussion and debate to get into. But I feel like a lot of times things that they just want to call fancy or become thrillers when there's no way that they're not just as much horror as other horror movies. But
and I think the main addition that I would like to add on would be Jordan Peele's Nope. The movie was a wild ride all the way through, and I will say that I did not expect quite what was coming, although I did have my suspicions about what the movie would be about. I don't think I could quite be prepared for what actually transpired in that movie, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, I would highly recommend that you do. It's a really, really dope movie.
Fair.
And that's all I will say because I don't want to spoil anything.
That's fair. Now we got another category, very similar, but something I just want to be able to talk about for some other movies that just is favorite horror movies you've watched for the first time this year that weren't discussed on Horror Boys, if you have any. I know I have a couple. That's why I brought this category in. But for me, specifically one that I definitely want to talk about, and we will be talking about in Horror Boys at some point because I loved it, was... Now I'm blanking on the name of the movie, and I feel horrible for even... Why am I blanking on the name of this movie? Crap. This is awkward. I don't remember the name of the movie. I feel terrible. It's an amazing movie.
What was the question?
Favorite horror movies you watched this year for the first time. They don't have to be from this year, but just movies you got around to seeing for the first time this year. And I wanted to talk about a movie. It's about a rage virus that goes in your eye. It's great. It's in a...
Oh, yeah.
Can't remember what it's
called. I know
called.
exactly what you're talking about.
It was so good. It's one of my top 20 horror movies.
It's got Harley Quinn.
No, does it?
And Glenn.
I thought it was... I don't think it's Margot. It's not Margot. It's
Was it not Margot Robbie?
No, it's the girl from the Babysitter movies. And Ready or Not. who looks a lot like Harley Quinn, but is not
Mm.
Margot Robbie. What the crap is the name of that movie?
It's Stephen
Stephen
Yeun.
Yeun. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's made by, forgot the name of the director too. Really liked it. Really liked it. It was a great movie.
It is Mayhem.
Mayhem. It's amazing. So good. I'm so mad that I, wasted 5 minutes there trying to remember the name of the movie. What's the other star's name?
It is Samara Weaving.
Samara Weaving, yes. Yeah. Who looks a lot like Margot Robbie, so that's fair.
She does, yeah.
But it's not Margot Robbie. It is Samara Weaving, and that movie is so good. It is such a fun take on a zombie movie. I loved it. I didn't love it apparently enough to remember its name in the moment, but I did love that movie. It was probably one of my favorite movies that I watched that was for not horror boys. Another one I'll give a quick shout out to is Halloween 4. Is probably my second favorite of the Halloween films behind the original because of how just amazing the original is. But I loved Halloween 4. It was such a fun movie. I love it. It's so fun seeing the character of Jamie Lloyd. Great movie. I look forward to covering that next year on Horror Boys.
Shoot. Trying to think of what else I watched this year.
That's fair. I didn't give you any prep on any of these questions.
I would say Barbarian was a pretty wild movie. That I did enjoy most of it.
But not good enough to bring up for your favorite movies of 2022, even though it also came out this year.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It was... It's hard to describe because the movie happens in 3 acts, and all 3 of them feel succinctly different than one another. And so it almost feels like 3 completely separate movies that were just have certain commonalities that loosely tie them together. I mean, it's the loose commonality is the underlying plot as to why everything's happening.
Fair.
But yeah, none of the separate acts feel like the same in any way, shape, or form. But there are certain acts that I really, really enjoyed, and were actually really funny because it's got what's his name, the Walrus. Movie. Or no, not Walrus movie. Tusk. What's his name?
Justin Long?
Yeah, it's got Justin Long in it. And he plays a great character. You love to hate kind of character.
Fair.
But yeah, that was a fun one. And there are some other movies that I look forward to watching that came out in 2022 that I haven't gotten around to watching.
Fair.
Such as Terrifier 2 and Bones and All.
Those are all definitely on my list. For me, I also have Black Phone on my list as a movie I definitely need to see.
Yeah.
Barbarian was on my list of movies I need to see. What else came out this year that I
Pearl,
need? There's a lot.
neither of us have seen.
Which one?
Pearl, we've both mentioned.
There were so many horror movies and Bodies, I heard good things about.
Oh, interesting.
There's a lot of good horror movies that came out this year, and this is a great year to come into horror as a horror fan. Because I've listened to many videos where people talk about this being one of the best years of horror in modern history. The amount of awesome movies that came out, and then not awesome movies that I still want to see, The Mean One. It's a unofficial Grinch movie. It's that sounds awfully awesome, and maybe even just good. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but that sounds fun. And then we'll transition because I don't think that's actually got a wide release yet. I think it's only a partial release so far. I could be wrong though. But let's talk about horror movies we're excited for next year. Because I have 3. Those are Scream 6, because I love Scream. Scream is a great franchise, and I'm really intrigued about it being in New York and completely new setting like that. Sounds really fun. Well, obviously, I, like everyone, am disappointed that we will not have, our Sidney Prescott there. It'll be weird, but, I do have faith in the Radio Silence guys who made Scream 5 because they made a great movie. So I have faith that they're going to make another great movie. So, I mean, they could prove me wrong, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. Another one is, once again, Maxine. I loved X. I've heard great things about Pearl, and I'm sure Maxine will also be great. It seems like somehow in just under a year, it looks like Ty West is going to make, one of the best horror trilogies, in a year and a half time span, which is insane.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he had thought out the entire world.
I mean, he had to. I mean, X and Pearl were shot back to back, so at the very least, those two movies he had fully planned.
He basically had a 3-hour long movie planned.
Yeah,
it's like, all right, let's cut it in half. He had a movie that was 3 acts that he wanted to film. And he filmed them as 3 separate movies.
But the thing is, I don't think that's fair to say it like that, because that implies that, if a movie's only an act of a movie, it's not going to be, X is a complete story. A completely solid, great movie. And I've heard good things about Pearl as well. Once again, I can't specifically, personally talk on it, because I have not seen it. But I've heard good things. I've heard people really liked it. So I'm sure it's also a complete movie in its own right. But yeah.
I'm sure they all are.
Yeah, and then lastly, and definitely leastly, is I have to see Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, when that comes out next year. Does it look good? No. Does it look so insane that I have to see the Winnie the Pooh horror movie because it's in public domain now? Yes. Yes, I do. I have to see that movie. I have to experience what is almost definitely going to be garbage that is that movie, but hopefully it's a fun garbage. And I'm sure there'll end up being other movies that I didn't know, weren't expecting. This year, there were lots of movies that I wasn't expecting at all that ended up just coming out and being great. So,
yeah, we're having a golden age in horror.
We really
long
are.
last. Yeah, I'll say Scream 6. I'm very much looking forward to seeing. One that is, I guess, depending on where you are on the internet, is either something you probably have never heard of or have heard of way too much. And that is a movie called Skinamarink, which is basically a entire movie that is just an analog horror movie.
Okay.
Which, for those of you who don't know what analog horror is, watch the Mandela catalogs on YouTube, and enjoy that. But it looks really, really creepy and unsettling, and I enjoy the dimly lit setting and the kind of eerie camera work that I've seen in the trailers and some of the reviews that I've seen YouTubers do on it. Well, a YouTuber. Shout outs to Mr. GG, even though he probably does not need it from a channel with 60 subscribers.
We have 9 subscribers on this channel.
Oh, 9. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's 60 followers on Twitch.
No, but this isn't on Twitch at all. So
no, right. 9 subscribers on our YouTube channel.
And 7 or so weekly listeners on the podcast.
But yeah, I think that looks really cool. I don't know if lots of people will like it, but based on my taste in horror, I feel like I will like it, at least for a one-time viewing. It will be a really cool experience, and I have high hopes for it.
Fair. My next question is the time where we, pat ourselves on the back for a little bit. We talk about our favorite things we've done. What's your favorite episode of Horror Boys?
Favorite episode of Horror Boys? I want to say it's probably The Lighthouse.
That's fair.
Back when we still had all 3 of our Horror Boys, I think there's a really fun discourse that happened there, and I just really enjoyed watching that movie in general.
It's fair.
Uh, and really got to see our third horror boy Isaiah at the time. Just flex his literature knowledge.
Yeah.
It was fun, and also helped me gain a new appreciation for all the elements in the lighthouse
It's fair.
after a second watch.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's definitely always ones where it's just like where you watch like a good movie is always fun too, like a fun episode. I think, I feel like for me, some of the ones I'll give like specific shout outs to are from a couple different eras. The first one, we'll start with one of the more modern era, just because it's probably a little bit lower on the list because I don't love the podcast as much without our boy Isaiah or our boy other Chris. But I love when we can talk about movies that I'm pretty sure less people have seen. Things like Wishmaster. Like, I know my dad had never seen Wishmaster. You know, you would never, like, and a lot of people might not have seen it. I mean, it's not the most niche movie ever, so I'm sure there are definitely, it's a thing that I discovered from another horror podcast. Like, I know it's not like a movie that no one's heard of, but it is still a less discussed movie. And for a similar thing, I don't feel like a lot of channels cover Hatchet as much as I think it should be covered as a franchise. Like, it's not perfect, but I definitely think it's one that I don't see as much coverage on online personally. But also, once again, it's a little bit older. Maybe there was when it came out.
Yeah.
But that I'm not counting Hatchet as one of my favorite episodes. The other two that I want to give specific mentions for, actually no, there's a couple episodes. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna give a couple answers because I want to. Another one I really loved. It's also the first of a. So I never explained why I liked. What did I even say? Did I even say? I said Wishmaster. Sorry, my brain have too many thoughts because I have too many things I want to talk about. Next one that I want to talk about is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because one, it's a great movie. Two, it was just a fun discussion. But mostly, one of the reasons I really enjoyed it was one of the first episodes where we were like, it's like one of many times where the podcast has changed, like the way we format, like how we discuss things. It was the first time like we were really giving like credit to like the behind the scenes people, which is something I really like doing that. I like being able to be an education to someone who might not have cared before, but now they know that Daniel Pearl does really cool. If you liked the shots in that movie, you know it was Daniel Pearl to thank. Things like that. I think that's awesome. So that's one. Another one. I have a couple more. I'm sorry. I'm gonna cheat a lot. Another one I'm gonna give is a special one. Is it's not a good movie, and I don't even know if the discussion itself was that insightful or anything. But I really enjoyed the Leatherface episode. Because it was the only time we ever had all four horror boys on one episode. So that was a really special experience to have all those voices together, all having their thoughts heard and whatnot.
True.
So that was one I really enjoyed. Another one that I really liked was Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Because I just thought that was it was a fun episode to talk about. Talk about all the weird stuff behind the scenes with all the, totally subtextually gay elements of that movie that are definitely subtext. And definitely not just the text.
Yeah, definitely not
but I really liked that movie. I was kind of expecting to not like the movie because all I knew about the movie was it was the gay one, which I think it deserves a lot more than just being that. It's a great movie. And then lastly, for a completely different style one, I'll be honest, I kind of like the podcast where we get some heated thoughts and heated debates, maybe. So Freddy vs. Jason was a great episode to watch my boy over here get real unhinged.
What a stupid movie. Yeah. Still hate that one.
That's fair. I respect that. Here's the thing. I don't love that movie. I think it's got, like... on my rating system, I gave that movie a 1 for the majority of it, and a 9 for the last, like, arc. And if you average that out, it comes out to, like, a 4.5. And I think that's about where the movie deserves to be. Because, like, part of it is like, near perfection. That final fight is perfect. But then there's the rest of the movie, which is pretty hard to watch.
Yeah.
So I think together it makes a middling movie. But yeah, that's the end of our favorite episode question, where I gave you 6 episodes because I'm a rebel. And our next one, which I kind of maybe hinted at there, but our favorite arc. So, like, our favorite multiple movies that we covered. I will say that even though I could respect it as a choice and understand why you might choose it, because it was fun to hear the completely different things, I would say that Boy's Choice is excluded from being its own arc, technically.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I could understand the argument if someone tried to say it was, but I'm going to say it's not. So.
Oh, that's fair. And I have a feeling that our answers might be the same.
Oh. Well,
Let's
let me
be
hear your
honest.
answer first.
And that would be the Texas Chainsaw series.
Not at all.
Really?
I mean, I will explain your thoughts. I want you to actually have a chance to talk about why you like that arc.
I just enjoyed the arc because I thought the series of movies as a whole. Oh wait, no. Scream. I'm pivoting.
That's a fair answer, and that's a great answer. Still not my answer though.
Pivoting to Scream. Was also still the most fun, and also the most tolerable to sit through. But a close second would be Texas Chainsaw, because I also enjoyed most of those movies, even when they were like really bad. For different reasons than I would enjoy a movie normally.
Fair enough.
But Scream was just pretty much a blast to sit through every single time, and I always enjoyed talking about it, and getting to hear everyone else's thoughts on the movie as well.
It's fair. I respect that answer. I would not have respected the Texas Chainsaw Massacre answer, because that was my least favorite arc. Like, I do think there were some good episodes, but like that franchise as a whole, I discussed it on like the last episode, because it's what we do in each end of our arcs is we give a little wrap up of the whole arc. Is that whole franchise was the hardest for me to watch. Like every other episode, even when I end up liking the movie, I'd still dread having to watch the next one. Something about that arc. Here, I'll be real. It could have been I was going through a depression at the time, and that might have been part of it. But there is also an element of a lot of these movies were just middling at best. Like, there were some really good ones, there were some really bad ones, but a lot of them were just middling, and it's really hard to care about another middling movie after a middling movie.
That's fair. Are we gonna do our least favorite after this one?
I mean, we can. I mean, I guess we'll do it. I'll do it here because it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me.
Okay.
But my favorite is I have 2 answers. Quick shout out to the Hatchet arc, because once again, for some reason, I think it was cool to, like, my dad, for example, is one of our most loyal listeners, and he had never even heard of the Hatchet franchise. So to be able to like help him experience a whole new franchise in horror was cool, even if they weren't perfect movies or anything like that. I'm not gonna try to sit here and say that Hatchet is the perfect franchise. It's not.
Because it is not.
No.
Objectively speaking, it is not.
No,
it is a very fun franchise.
For me personally, I thought all 4 movies were fun. But I understand that you did not feel that way, and I'm not trying to open old wounds. And I'm going to take a little bit of a cheat, but yeah, my favorite arc is the Freddy vs. Jason arc. It was, I love.
That's not an arc.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, it was a movie.
No, the Freddy vs. Jason arc, as in the first 20 episodes of this podcast where we talked about all the Friday the 13th and all the Nightmare on Elm Street.
I guess that's fair.
Because it's...
Well, it is cheating, but I guess it's fair.
But if I had to choose, fine, I'll choose one. I'll say... It's hard, because I think the podcast got better starting with Nightmare on Elm Street. But I think overall I enjoyed the Friday the 13th movie experience personally more. So it's a hard one. So I'm going to say the Freddy vs. Jason arc and say that it's my podcast. I'll make my own rules.
Fair.
But yeah, it was the first arc. And they were all connected thanks to Freddy vs. Jason. And we also mixed, like, when we did, like, the remakes. Like, it counts as one weird giant arc. But yeah, like I said, Nightmare, the Friday the 13th franchise is not my favorite horror franchise. That would probably be Scream. But it was one that I didn't know anything about and came out really enjoying overall. There were definitely bad movies in there, but overall I still really like the franchise to the point where, as we started at the top of this podcast, my favorite gift I got this year was them on Blu-ray. I'm so excited to have that Blu-ray set because I really did enjoy that franchise overall. But I also think that the Nightmare on Elm Street podcast was the first time where the podcast got better in the way we produced it. Behind the scenes stuff. It's like the first time we started talking about actors that were in movies, unless their name was Kane Hodder, or if they were like, here's Corey Feldman, or here's the dad from Back to the Future that I can't remember his name, who's in like the 7th one or the 5th one. I don't remember which one he's even in, but he's in one of them randomly. But yeah. I that's one of the things that I do feel was a flaw with the Friday the 13th franchise was that the podcast, we didn't know what it was yet, so it wasn't what the podcast has become, like when it comes to the behind the scenes and love for the movie production side of movies that I have personally developed a lot of since doing this podcast. But yeah, so those are my answers, I guess. I'll be honest, I don't really dislike any of it that much. I don't know if I really have a least favorite arc besides maybe my personal experience watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. I think the episodes are still actually really good.
Fair.
So what's your least favorite arc? Because you apparently wanted one. So what franchise do you want to crap on?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be really any surprise to Austin, but my least favorite my least favorite arc, rather, was Friday the 13th.
That's fair. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, no. I definitely, I would say probably halfway through that franchise just got really burnt out on Friday the 13th. Because, don't get me wrong, there are Friday the 13th movies that I really enjoy. And I would go as far to say that I really loved watching. But there's a lot of Friday the 13th movies.
There's only 12. Come on.
And watching them all in a row, I was like, I don't care. And then we watched Jason X, and I was like, all right, something different is happening. Let's go.
Which is why, I don't know where this would have fit more in here, and I also have no idea when this will happen. It'll be a while. It'll be to the point where we're comfortably putting out content where I feel like we could do 2 a week. If and when, which is more of an if, because I want to at some point, or when, sorry, not when, I said that wrong. When, because I really want to, is I want to recover the Friday the 13th at some point down the line. It will be a secondary video each week, so it's not only watching that for 10 weeks. We would get to, maybe I'd make sure to pick a franchise that Chris really, Chris gives me a suggestion on what franchise to choose in the alternating side of the weeks, so Chris can at least watch something he really enjoys.
Less soul crushing to do it again.
But we're going to probably not next year, but maybe the year after that. I don't know exactly when we'll do it, but I really want to do it because I don't feel like we gave the Friday the 13th. I think the Friday the 13th franchise is a very important franchise in horror, and I don't think we gave it the justice it deserves with what the podcast has become since. Behind the scenes style and whatnot. Maybe we'll wait till we have Isaiah back on the podcast full time, so there's a 3-person podcast again for it. But who knows if that actually will happen for sure? So maybe we won't. We'll see. But also, I don't know when it's happening. Don't get too scared, Chris. Don't quit on me. I don't know when it's happening. But I'll make sure to, I'll figure it out to make it work for you, so you don't get burn out too bad again. But I feel like the behind the scenes stuff and stuff like that, we didn't do those movies justice. I had no fun facts for those movies because I didn't do any research on any of them and stuff like that. The podcast evolved multiple times. This is, it's the history of my opinion on the podcast real quick before we move on to the next question is, I feel like there's multiple eras of this podcast. It has nothing to do with the hosts, because that also, you could argue, has its own, 3 eras.
Yeah.
But of, the style of how we presented the podcast, the 3 eras, or multiple, I don't know if there's 3, I'll go each era, was Friday the 13th had its own era where we were just discussing the movies. Well, sorry, Friday the 13th part 1, where we have like a 45-minute podcast where it's disjointed because I have no notes because I didn't realize how the podcast was going to be presented at all. I thought we were going to go more general overview, which is how a lot of people would do podcasts, but then both you and Isaiah both tried to tell every scene that happened. So I was like, I guess we're doing it this way going forward each week. So I started making my notes presented that way. But there's like 1 or 2 episodes where I had enough time to watch maybe a YouTube video on it throughout those, because we also would like watch the movie on Wednesday and then record the podcast that night or something. Like that was how that podcast was made back then. So like there was no time to take any research. So there's no research. Research started on Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. But I still wasn't really talking about cast members yet. I started sometimes like, I'd talk about, who played Nancy. I'd talk about Heather Langenkamp, and I'd talk about, Robert Englund. But I wouldn't talk about every cast member like I do now, which I think is cool in case, what if someone in, like, this person's family discovered our podcast randomly, and they get to hear their, grandpa's name? That'd be cool. I want to do that for that random person that might exist someday. Then the next era would be when I started, probably, I think it's around Boys' Choices when I started going over every cast member. And then Texas Chainsaw Massacre is when I start going over the behind-the-scenes people. So we have, like, multiple eras there of when the And here's the thing. Anything post me being able to do some research, so, everything after Friday the 13th, will never get recovered. There's no need. The podcast is close enough to what it is now. But the research side of things really changes in most episodes. So... Yeah. That's why Friday the 13th someday will get recovered. That was a big tangent that was in no way planned, and now I will move on. This is my favorite category because it's gonna completely. I guess it might not. It might end up hurting me more. Actually, now that I think about it. What is your favorite bit/joke of the podcast, or least favorite? If there's something you really hate and you want to crap on me for, do it. I don't care.
I know what Austin's answer is gonna be.
I have a few.
I would imagine.
Yeah. Every bit I do is hilarious, guys. Or joke. There is one specific joke that's not a bit that I want to bring up because I'm still so proud of it. I'll go first so Chris has time to think, because once again, Chris did not have any time to prep any of this. My favorite joke is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the reboot, when the old man grabs Jessica Biel's character's butt, and I said cop and a feel on Jessica Biel. I think it is one of the funniest things I've ever said on the podcast. I could be wrong. That's my thoughts. So that's what I thought. I loved that because it was such a perfectly timed, like, punny... Not pun. It's not a pun at all. But, like, play on words and rhyming. I thought it was cute and stupid and funny. Favorite bit is... It's definitely Billy's mother. Yep. Also, it's an old bit, but I also enjoy throwing Chris out of windows.
Yeah, I think that honestly has to be probably my favorite bit, is that anytime we see a ridiculous stunt, we mention that I will be performing it live in our tour. Yeah, that totally. Is not happening.
No. I would never let you do any of these stunts because I still stand by. Go back to episode 2 when that stunt he thought he could do. I still stand by. I think Chris would get severely injured doing that. I would never let him do it.
Let me do it. Let me jump out a window.
But yeah, I love the Billy's mother bit. More so for it since, I'll be honest, I think the first episode, maybe I went a little too hard on it. But I think whenever there's a time to bring it up since, it's been really funny. I also personally love the It's Ghostface bit whenever a phone call happens. Because we talked about the Scream movies where every other scene Ghostface would call and I have to go, and Ghostface calls and stuff like that. So I enjoy those. Oh, also, we have to give a shout out to Playing Harmonica, which is technically a bit, and it has been around since episode 2 and has been in pretty much every episode.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. I don't know if favorite bit/joke will be in next year's. I'd have to like have noticed a new bit, because I don't want to talk about the same bits over and over again every year. That seems lame. But yeah, that's the favorite bit/. Do you have any favorite jokes you said? Do you remember any funny things you said on the podcast that you want to, give yourself a pat on the back? Do you have anything? You think anything I ever said was really funny, or Isaiah or other Chris?
I can't think of any.
I see how it is. You don't think our podcast is funny?
I think one of my favorite bits is usually Well, it's one that happened off camera and before the podcast every time. Is when we had Isaiah's. Every time we would do a peek behind the
Oh, the
curtains.
audio check where you guys wouldn't shut up?
Yeah, the audio check for me and Isaiah was just both. As soon as Austin would be like, "All right, can you guys shut up so I can check the audio?" Uh, one of us would think of something really stupid and usually very inconsequential to talk about in the middle of the audio check, and both me and Isaiah got a good kick out of it every time.
One last funny bit that I think is really great is when I bring up Buffy characters. I think that's fun. Most people
That's
probably hate it, and I don't care. This is my podcast, and if you don't want to listen to it, that's fair. Maybe try to tell your other friends like horror. Maybe they will like my bits. They might not, and that's also fine. I'm not trying to say anyone has to like my bits, but my bits are part of who I am. I am a stupid person, stupid silly person, and I will still be a stupid silly podcast host, co-host person on a podcast. I don't know what role I'm supposed to give myself officially. I feel like I'm probably technically the host, but
Yeah,
but I don't.
I
I
would
never
say
wanted to say
the
that
host.
because I look at all of us as equals, no matter who's been on the podcast.
Oh, okay.
Our next question: who is your favorite between Isaiah and other Chris? I'm kidding. We're not going to really do that.
Nope.
But what I
We're not
will
doing
want to do is just talk about Isaiah and other Chris real quick because they were a big part equally in their own rights for this first year of the podcast. Start with Isaiah. This podcast would not exist without Isaiah. I did not think we could do this podcast just me and Chris. I think due to circumstance, we've proved that I was wrong, and we can do this
Yeah.
podcast just me and him if we have to. But without Isaiah, this podcast would have never happened. And I also got to reconnect with one of my really good friends through this podcast, and I thought he brought such a fun, intellectual slant that me and Chris were never going to bring to this podcast.
No.
Before I move on to other Chris, I'll let you say anything about Isaiah if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I very much enjoy Isaiah's company and his voice that he brings to the podcast. As much as I think that both Austin and I are fairly intelligent, Isaiah does have a very, very solid grasp on literature specifically, which usually film pulls a lot from literature, which Isaiah has a deep and vast knowledge for. Which, like I had said previously, really helped me gain a newfound appreciation for certain movies and certain scenes in certain movies. And I do miss having that voice on the podcast, but as Austin has said, we've proved that we can just, still hold our own, just the two of us. And I would just like to take this moment to say that I'm proud of us for carrying on.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about Chris
Yeah,
Black.
let's talk about other Chris. Or
Other Chris.
2. I don't know if we ever actually officially said his last name on here, which is what I always personally have referred to him as. So I'll just keep calling him Other Chris. He'd come up with a silly nickname for himself every week. I don't remember any of them. I think he was Chris,
Yeah.
Two
Chris 2, Electric Boogaloo.
He was also Too Fast, Too Chris or something like that once. He was doing just sequel names. It was a good bit. That's a honorable mention for funny bits. Homeboy was on 5 episodes, and he changed this podcast for the better. I loved him. I miss him. I hope to someday have him back on this podcast. Who knows? Life happens. Things happen. People don't always have time or the right, energy to bring to a podcast, and that's fine. Life happens. I understand that. But I miss him. He was great. He didn't bring an intellectual side, but to be fair, I don't know if technically he brought anything that neither of us brought technically. But he just brought such an energy and a joy and also a very much a knowledge about the behind the scenes stuff. He'd come out with fun facts at me and I'd be like, what are you doing?
Oh,
you're stepping on my bit, guy. No, I'm kidding. I loved him. I miss him. He's great. That's about it, I guess. Yeah. Just he's great. That's it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say that he brought an energy that I don't think either of us really had, and a kind of eagerness to talk about the movie every week. It always felt like he had a lot to say, regardless of what movie we watched. and it was always a welcome addition to the conversation that we had. Um, and, yeah, I would love for one day to have all four of us on the podcast. That is the dream.
Yeah. But we're not going to go to dreams for the podcast. Next, we're actually going to go to achievable goals for next year, which I have twofold. One, we'll start with the first one, is, which these are honestly, spoiler if you listen to our other podcast, they're relatively the same idea. It's short form content. I want to produce preferably some sort of, probably alternating what it is, but some sort of, I'd love to get to the point where I'm making, maybe with Chris' involvement here or there if you can, some sort of weekly short form content, 20 minutes absolute max, like preferably 15, it would be, I'd say, the goal, because that's like the digestible YouTube video length. I'd love to put out something on YouTube that like helps grow the channel, because simply put, I don't know how you grow a podcast on podcast apps. And when it comes to YouTube, podcasts don't do well. It's just the way it works. So like I would love to get eyes on the channel that maybe every once in a while one of those people would fall in love with the podcast. So that would be, I feel like, an achievable goal that could happen this year. To be fair, I believe at some point mid this year, I think I brought up doing this year. So yeah, I didn't get around to it. So obviously, hey, it might not happen this upcoming year. And then this next one, I'll say it because it's, technically, still I think something that is achievable, but it also might still fall under more of a dream technically, is collaborations with the horror community on YouTube and whatnot. There's a lot of great horror channels that I really like, and I feel like it's possible. It is definitely possible to be able to collaborate with other horror creators. This one creator I will specifically mention that this definitely falls under being a dream as well, but I do honestly, personally think maybe is possible, hopefully, is I would love to do something with Dan Dramble's, because I've said before, if it wasn't for that man and the content he creates, this podcast would not exist. I know Isaiah is partially responsible for this podcast existing, because he is, but I would have never even thought to make a horror movie podcast if Dan Dramble's video essays on on horror movies didn't make me go, ooh, I really want to know more about horror movies. I want to be a horror fan now because of his content. That's what got me into wanting to try to be a horror fan. And guess what? I am now. And we have a podcast because of him in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's, I guess, my achievable goal / kind of my dreams. I'll try to think of another dream for when we get to the actual dream question. But yeah, so that's my achievable goals for next year. Do you have any? I mean, it's fair if you don't.
Yeah, I don't know what I do, to be honest. Aside from, the obvious ones that have already been mentioned. That I do think having some sort of shorter form content for the channel would help us grow. But at the same time, I know that's a lot of the production behind the scenes.
Yeah,
I would go into that. But I do think collabs rather. Some other horror creators would be really sick. I definitely knew you would say Dan Tramples, and that would be sick. I think, I don't know how we would do it, and I don't know that I've seen them do much collabs, although I'm sure they do, is the Dead Meat folks.
Yeah, I mean, it would be amazing. I feel like, just due to size and scope, that would
definitely more of a dream.
That's definitely more of a dream. I would love to do something with them. Maybe probably more have them on something we did. Probably would be more likely what they'd be able to agree. I don't think we'd ever get to the point where it makes sense for them to want us on their content, which is fair.
Yeah. Which I guess I'll put that under my dream. Okay. But yeah, just being able to produce a little bit more, a little bit more freely.
Yeah. My dream is what would be like a Dead Meat working with them. They're definitely a dream collaboration would be Dead Meat. And once again, it's still Dan Drambles because it is still officially a dream. I do think it is a slightly more achievable dream. But, I don't know. You never know with any of that kind of stuff. But what else? What other dreams do I have? First off, just success. Pretty obvious. I want... Like my dream...
The channel to do well?
My dream would be for this to be what, is my job. I love this podcast more than I love, don't tell Downtown Kentucky this, Horror Boys fans. This is my dream. This is what I love right now. This is the piece of content, or pieces of content, I guess, technically, but this is the thing I'm most proud of that I've ever made in my life. Obviously, maybe if I ever have a kid or something, that'll change. But maybe, who knows? I don't know. It'd be a tough ladder for that kid to climb.
Yeah,
I love Horror Boys.
A lot of competition.
I love Horror Boys. Which is crazy. Which is so crazy. Which I think this is a question I kind of skipped over, but we'll throw it here. It's just general thoughts, which we've covered most of, but just general thoughts. This is our first year. We've put out, when this episode comes out, 51 episodes of Horror Boys. So technically, this first episode of next year, that's coming out next week, Child's Play, is not technically the 1 year anniversary. It'll be Child's Play 2 would be our 1 year anniversary episode. But we put out a year of content. Yeah. That's crazy. And it's our first year, and I'm just I love this. I love this little baby of ours. It's crazy. I really, I've said that a couple times now, in this little one thing. I'm trying to come up with my thoughts because I didn't prep written out thoughts or anything. But if you go back to that first episode, which I stand by isn't a great episode of Horror Boys, but does explain who we are pretty well. But it doesn't technically, if you go back to it now, because it doesn't explain who I am now, I was not a horror fan. I did not watch horror movies. I had seen technically probably 20, and I enjoyed maybe even a lot of them, but they were more few and far between, and the general idea of a horror movie I hated. I hated the idea of being scared, which, to be fair, I honestly haven't really been scared of most of the horror movies I've seen now. But that's also because if you've paid attention to the channel, I have kind of stayed away from a certain style of horror that does just kind of scare me a little bit more than others, and I don't really personally want to cover, but that's a whole different discussion for a different day. We'll get to the Conjuring universe in 8 years, I promise.
That's fair.
But I had written off horror for the most part because I didn't like some trailers for horror movies would scare me. So I was I don't want to be scared. Being scared is weird. But now I love horror. I'm sitting next to me right here off camera. I have 124 horror movies sitting next to me right now. Yeah. I owned 3 going into this year because I owned Screams 1, 2, and 3 on Blu-ray. I now own 120 more horror movies in the last almost 12 months. I love horror now, and it's because of this podcast. It's because of Friday the 13th being enjoyable enough and discussing it with my friends that I fell in love with the idea of horror movies. Specifically for me, I'm a slasher boy and probably will be a slasher boy for that'll be my personal horror of choice. But I've liked non-slasher movies. I've liked some zombie movies. I've liked some modern psychological horror. I like horror now. I didn't really like The Lighthouse. I'm sorry, people. I'm sorry. It was a little too weird for me. But I loved Hereditary. But yeah, horror has become such a huge part of my life now, and it's because of this podcast. It's because of, watching a Dan Drambles video on Freddy vs. Jason that made me go, I need to watch the rest of the videos under this series called Wholesome Halloween, and then I fell in love with horror through those videos, and I said, hey, Chris, you want to start a horror movie podcast with me? If we can find a third person? And Chris was like, yeah, sure, I guess. And then I couldn't find anyone, because I went through all my social medias, and no one I could think of who I was currently talking to at the time was someone I could ask. And then, I randomly was on a stupid texting app, and I saw Isaiah's name, and went, oh my gosh, I wonder if Isaiah likes horror movies. And he did. And he helped us launch this podcast, and we did 40 episodes with him. And yeah, it's amazing. And then, you know, Chris Glass came in and replaced him for only 5 weeks because of, you know, some personal stuff with his life. And that's cool. I'm not mad at Chris. He came in and he had 4 great episodes. 4 of my favorite, honestly, probably. Like, they were great episodes. I loved having him on this podcast. And yeah, it's just... I love this podcast. I guess that's it. I'm going to stop rambling because I don't know if I'm saying anything really new here. But this first year meant a lot to me.
Yeah, that's fair. I will say it's been a really cool experience as someone who's been a horror fan from like a very young age. To see like my best friend finally get into horror, which is a genre I've loved for a long time, and get into it in a way that I haven't gotten into it, like behind all the behind the scenes stuff. He's had to do research on, and has given them a pretty deep appreciation for all of the work goes into the movies. And I think it's just been really cool to see you really just like dive headfirst into this fandom. And while, you know, technically they might be different subgenres of the fandom that we typically enjoy, I think just this experience making the podcast and getting to watch these movies and talk about them has been really cool, and I hope we get to do it for a whole lot longer.
Yeah, at least one more year. No, we're not stopping, guys. Like I've said before, I have 7 years planned
We've got a schedule.
I have like 7 years planned out, and there's tons of movies that have come out this year that aren't on the schedule at all. There's a lot of other movies that will come out next year, and there's movies that I just never got around to even thinking about. I have a whole list of like hundreds of, probably at least 100 movies that aren't all on the schedule that I need to get
Horror Bois is happening forever.
Yeah.
Like it or not, guys.
And that's one of the things I've said before, like off thing. I don't see a reason Horror Bois ever has to end. Even if we don't ever have a lot of viewers, I hope we do. Like I said, it's my dream for this to be my job.
Yeah.
Horror Bois being my job would be my dream. But
Yeah.
I can talk about horror movies with my best friend into my 40s. Like, which means we got, you know, another like 15 years at least before I'd even think about stopping. We're probably not going to be Twitch streamers for 15 years. We could be horror movie podcasters for 15 years.
Yeah.
And so last thing before we end is a schedule. I'm about to give the first time ever like going above and beyond. I'm going to tell you the schedule for the first half of next year tentatively. Obviously, sometimes I have to change the schedule. There's one thing at the end of the schedule that definitely could have to be changed due to other people's availability. But yeah, let's talk about the schedule. Starting on January 2nd, this upcoming Monday, we will start the Child's Play franchise, which will go till February 20th when we cover the reboot. We will not be covering the Chucky TV show. Currently, I want to at some point in some way. I don't know how. Just right now, I couldn't.
Might be a good short form content, to be honest.
Maybe. We'll see. The problem is it's still like a 45-minute show that I'd have to try to take some sort of notes on. So I don't know. We'll figure it out. We will figure out how to cover it at some point. Because I want to. Because I think it's genuinely great. And if you like the Child's Play movies, I think it's a great continuation of their story. I think it is amazing. I talked about it on this already. I talked about it probably even more, surprisingly, on our Downtown Kentucky podcast. I actually don't know if I even did talk about it on this. I think I only talked about the Downtown Kentucky podcast. Oops.
I think that's true, yeah.
Yeah, then February 27th through March 27th, we will be covering the Final Destination franchise.
Ooh.
Yeah. I've only seen the first one, but I actually really enjoyed it. It's got that fun, like, teen horror vibes.
They are fun.
Yeah.
Are they good movies? No.
I think the first one is. I've only seen the first one so far, and I actually thought it was a good movie. Not a great movie, but I thought it was good.
Yeah, it's a solid movie.
Yeah.
First one's solid.
Then, movies that are, you know, divisive. Some people love them, some people hate them. Some people, I think, wrongfully hate them for things that they might not even fully, truly be. At least, especially not the first one. And that's the Saw franchise, which we'll be covering from April 3rd to May 29th. It popularized a term that I mean, we probably could say on YouTube, because apparently everyone else gets away with saying it, but we try not to say...
Torture, other word.
Harmonica playing videos.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, especially from what I've heard about the first Saw, it definitely isn't, even though it's considered like the start of it. So maybe some of the later ones get more to that, but also like, from my understanding, there's also like a soap opera basically that is playing out throughout it as well, which is not typically how harmonica playing videos work. So I don't know if that's the right term for it. And then lastly, that got us through May 9th. From June 5th to June 26th, the last thing I will talk about is, tentatively, especially this one, is Boys' Choice. Should be coming back for Boys' Choice 2, Electric Boogaloo. We'll be coming back for 4 weeks. Will there be 4 horror boys to talk about during it? Maybe. Maybe will it be me and Chris both choosing 2 movies each? Maybe.
Maybe.
Will I have to bump it to later in the summer where a certain horror boy who's definitely has more availability in the summer might not have availability in June, but could hypothetically have availability later in the month? Maybe. Who knows? That's the tentative schedule through June, though. I'll go over it real quick again. Not weeks, but just Child's Play, then Final Destination, then Saw, and then probably Boys' Choice. Those first 3 will almost definitely go that way unless I have to bump them like a week because, oh my gosh, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is the greatest horror movie of all time, and I have to cover it when it comes out within a couple weeks. I know that's not going to be the case. Or, oh my gosh, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is the worst movie I've ever seen ever, and I need to crap on it for an hour and a half.
Which is possible.
It is possible. But tentatively,
much more like them.
I also don't really like changing the schedule personally because it's hard. That'll probably be the schedule for the first half or so of the next year. And maybe, we probably won't do a full video on it, but maybe one of the short-form content videos will be a little brief discussion on the rest of the year or something. Who knows? I don't know. I hope everyone has a great new year. I hope you keep listening. I hope you listen to this one. This was a different Horror Boys episode. If you listen to this whole thing, hey, thanks. Yeah. I'm not going to give you the normal outro. You don't have to. You don't have to give a 5-star review on this episode, guys. It's okay. You don't have to like, comment, and subscribe. You don't have to. You don't have to go to patreon.com/horrorboys and give us money because you want to support us. You just don't have to do it this time around, guys. It's not necessary for you to go do that. It's not necessary for you to hit the bell on YouTube so you get notifications when more videos come out. It's just not necessary this time around.
You don't even have to click the like button.
You don't. You don't have to leave a comment telling us how much you liked it. You can just like it and move on. That's fine. We understand.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell a friend about how good this podcast is, guys. You just don't have to do it.
But if you did, it'd be cool.
But yeah, please do. Please. Late Christmas present for us, maybe?
All right.
But for real, though, I love anyone who listens to this podcast. Even if I know you, I love you, Dad. But if you're someone who's not my dad who listens to the podcast, I love you too. I don't know you, but I love you because when I see that there's some views on these videos or podcasts, I go, hey, we're not making this for no one. Cool. I still would because I love it, but it's cool to know that people are seeing this and hearing this.
It's less demoralizing.
Yeah. Like all of our YouTube videos on downtown Kentucky. What? Oh, and look at that. We are out of time today. I've been Austin, joined by Chris. We'll see you next week. Wait. Nope, sorry. Cross that out. We'll see you next year, baby.
Next year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Have a good New Year. Bye-bye.
Bye.